everyone. Thank you for coming. So as you know, this is about envisioning the future of local news. And as Lisa mentioned, we have a great panel here. I'm going to introduce the panelists in a second, but what I wanted to do first, I wanted to know, get a sense of who we're talking to. So if I could see a show of hands, who here is a reporter or works in the news industry? Okay. Who is in maybe the PR marketing side of things? Okay. Yeah. And then how about people that are just here because they're interested in local news? Yes, look at that, awesome. Okay.
Also, who came for free pizza?
And, right. We didn't advertise a free pizza, so I'm not sure if there's many of those people, but that's great, that's a good mix. And there's one other thing we're going to do, and we have Stephanie is in the back. She has index cards and pens. So we're gonna try a little experiment here. This is all about the future of local news, and so what we wanted to do was everyone take an index card and a pen, and we are going to collect these at the end, but we wanted to ask you for your input on envisioning the future of local news. We wanted to ask you, in 5 years, think about where you're going to be, what kind of mobile devices you're going to have, and ask you to just think and envision in 5 years how you will see yourself and your friends and your colleagues consuming local news. Just, pretend you're writing a sci-fi novel or something like that, and then you want a scene where someone's reading, about last night's town council meeting. How are you going to be doing that? So they're being passed out. We're going to collect those at the end, and maybe they'll spur some interesting conversations, but just interesting thought experiment. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce them one at a time. I'm going to ask them to just give a brief introduction to themselves, their background, and what they bring to this conversation. So to begin, on my immediate right is Justin Ellis. He's actually a former staff writer at the Press-Herald and has worked for the past 5 years at Harvard's Nieman Journalism Lab, which means he spends his days in and out talking about and covering the future of local news. So Justin, tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of what you're bringing to this conversation.
What I'm bringing to this conversation, that's really heady, and you're asking me to lie already. Hi, at one point in my life, I covered the Portland Water District. At another point, I was tasked by my editors to try and find out if Tom Brady had a summer home on Sebago Lake. So I was very happy to spend 7 years working for the Press-Herald and was very, very fortunate with all the opportunities that I got there. After my time there, I went to the Nieman Lab. We are part of the Nieman Foundation for Journalism, which is largely known in journalism circles for providing fellowships. What that means is that journalists, usually half from the US and half from all across the world, come to study at Harvard for a year. They can bring their families, pick a course of study. So if they want to do something that sort of aligns with their beat or coverage area, if you cover politics perhaps, you can go to the Kennedy School. If you want to do something that looks into sort of the future of the business models of newspapers, you can go and study at the business school. But my day-to-day work at the lab is mostly writing about media companies. So I sort of switched from writing about town councils and the water district and now covering media companies, what they're doing in terms of technology, how they are trying to develop new business models, basically how technology has upended everything that we thought we knew about the media business. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great, excellent, thank you. So to Justin's right, we have Lisa Williams. She's the Director of Online Engagement at the Institute for Nonprofit News. So Lisa, tell us a bit about what you do in your day-to-day job and how your background, how you got there.
Hi guys. I actually came out of the tech industry and I got into news because I had a baby who never slept, and I impulsively quit my job, went home, took a 14-hour nap, and thought, oh my God, when I woke up. And the next thing I did was I started a local news site for the place where I still live, Watertown, Massachusetts. And we covered the town council with puppets, which if you knew Watertown, Massachusetts, totally appropriate. And after that, I actually went to work for the Boston Globe. I'm a fellow at a place called the MIT Media Lab, where I work on the future of news and civic engagement. So how you're going to get your news, how you're going to be a citizen of a place. And the place I work at now has 140 newsroom members. who have won Pulitzers, although probably you've never heard of them, mostly because a lot of their work appears in other places like the New York Times or 60 Minutes. But you actually have a member right here, which I'd be interested to know how many of you have heard of the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. Nice. I'm really glad that you guys do. If you haven't, and you go to Pine Tree Watchdog, you're going to find lots of great stories about Maine. And I really, really love working with our members who are, by and large, scrappy little startups. And we exist to help them survive and thrive.
Excellent. Thank you. And then, last but not least, we have Bob Kempf. He's the Vice President for Digital Services at NPR. Tell us
Thanks,
a bit.
Whit.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Nice to be here in Portland. Let's see. It's on my Twitter feed. It says for a long time at the intersection of local and digital and looking for ways to cross. It's pretty much a good description. At NPR, although you may know us as a producer of national and international news, we are also a member organization with, what is it, Mark? 900 stations, 300 licensees. So we are intensely local. And our job at Digital Services is to provide capabilities for all of our stations to provide capabilities for them to produce news, engage with their communities, and do it on digital platforms. Before that, I was at the Boston Globe, at boston.com for 5 years. Before that, at Gatehouse Media. Before that, at the Dow Jones Community News Group, starting off at the Cape Cod Times 100 years ago, and the early dawn of the internet in the mid-90s. So it's been all about local and digital and seeing those and hopefully shepherding the transformation across platforms for local news. I personally believe it's really important to do, and this is part of the mission. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and all of your challenging questions.
Yes.
Thanks.
Excellent. All right. So that's who we got. What we're going to do is break down the conversation, I think, into two main themes. The first is going to be kind of the big existential question is how do local media companies make money in this new environment? And the second theme we're going to talk about is innovation in the newsroom and how changing technology is how newsrooms should be leveraging new technology to better serve audience, better get their news into the hands of the right people. But we're going to start with the big existential question, and so this is we'll kick it off with some quick data, though. As most people realize, kind of the old traditional newspaper model is broken down with the digital revolution. I wanted to just throw some numbers out at you. So in 2004, U.S. newspapers brought in $46.7 billion in print advertising revenue. 10 years later, last year in 2014, that number was $16.4 billion, according to the Pew Research Center. So a common misconception was always that, all right, so print advertising is falling. Digital advertising revenue is going to replace that. People want to, still get their ads in front of the eyeballs of readers, so we'll sell online ads. But when you look at the numbers, that's not how it turned out. Looking at the same time period, 2004 to 2014, digital ad revenue at the U.S. newspapers increased from $1.2 billion to $3.5 billion. So while print ad revenue fell by more than $30 billion in that 10-year period, digital ad revenue only replaced about $2.3 billion of that. So $30 billion down and replaced by only $2.3 billion. So obviously there's a big hole there. That's the data, big picture question to set the stage. What have local news outlets, whether it's a local public radio station or a nonprofit news startup or a newspaper, done in the face of this reality? Justin, why don't you start off and speak in the microphone? I know it's a big question, but
Yeah,
We're right behind you, Justin.
You're starting us off with a real positive note. I don't know about you guys, but I feel really good about life right now. Well, in the face of this, they've done a couple of things, and I think the largest one that most people recognize is that they've shifted the emphasis from advertising over to readers, basically. That's been the biggest sort of shift that we've seen, and that largest thing that we've seen with that is paywalls and online subscription mechanisms that people have used. The one that obviously kind of kicked everything off was the New York Times when they started in 2011. And what made their model different from, say, the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, which had an online subscription platform before that, was that they decided to give people free trials, basically. You get free samples. And since then, it's sort of just overtaken the industry. And I think as a result, we've seen that now a lot of companies are moving the proportions of what they had from advertising over to reader revenue, is what we try to call it at the lab. But it's still not making up the entire difference. So it's still a little bit tricky to say the least. For a lot of places, what they've seen is that they get an initial boost out of their paywall. Sometimes they get an even bigger boost because they will raise the subscription price for the print product as well. But after a while, some models plateau. They'll pick up steam and then slow down a little bit. People have been saying that the New York Times is going to reach 1 million digital subscribers for the last 2 years. And they're closer now than they have been, but the rate of subscriptions has definitely slowed down.
Mm. And so, Lisa, what about, I mean, obviously, the nonprofit news model too, and new startups? I mean, how has this affected the business models of?
You know, the group of news organizations that I work with, they're nonprofits, but they're not substantially different from any other small business. They're not supported by a perpetual trust the way the Guardian in the UK is supported by a huge foundation. They have to bring money in too. And so what they really focus on is that they know that unless they can convert some of the consumers of the work into supporters of the work, they're not going to survive. So the folks who are really doing well are people who really focus on having a really robust connection with the folks who we used to know as the audience. You know, and I would say to those of you who are in the room who aren't in the news industry, you know, I would love to know, like, what is your local paper sort of asking you to do besides consume? Like, if you look at the web page, look at it and say, what are they asking me to do besides read an article? And do I want to do that thing? Are they providing me enough value to do that? Because that's really where survival is for these guys.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to chime in, Bob?
I do. I do. I mean, if you work for a newspaper, and I think a lot of you do, don't take this the wrong way, but what's happened with public radio, certainly on digital platforms, is we've gotten into the game locally, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's quite a good thing, because it speaks to the potential for, and I'm not saying this is the entire answer, but for collaboration between entities that may have competed previously. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a certain amount of inevitable consolidation that's going to happen. Some news agencies just aren't going to be able to sustain themselves. So it's like, you know, move forward or die, really. And I think that there's opportunity for that, to be proactive about it, because that consolidation is going to inevitably happen. So that's kind of the bad news. The good, public radio has been fortunate in that, and we have a model. So the public radio economy is about $1 billion. That's all the stations, what all the stations make. A little over half of that is listener support. And as my former boss used to say, it's like extraordinary that half of our $1 billion economy is driven by listener support, and it's all voluntary. And that's just an amazing thing when you think about it. It's been around for 40 years. And it's an extraordinary kind of advantage that I think we have. And as Lisa points out, what is that grounded in? It's grounded in, public radio is free. You can just go get it. But if you feel compelled, or you feel that there's a contribution being made to your community, and this is of value to you, you're going to contribute. There's a sort of a long-standing relationship built with those audiences. It's constrained to broadcast. Have we moved that onto digital platforms, into text image? Not in any really kind of appreciable way yet, but that's really the goal. Is to sort of build that as a component. And I see, in various subscription plays on the print side, similar kinds of thinking to sort of build. It isn't maybe necessarily just a transaction for content, although that's important, but it's also sort of building a basis of like value to you as an individual and to your community. And I think sort of bringing that into the mix, it's not a silver bullet, but to have a diversified model that includes events, that includes content, that includes sort of what you want to call membership privileges, if you will. That mix that is really moving community and individuals closer to what we are as news and culture and community brands, I think is probably there's somewhere in that gumbo is sustainability.
Yeah. And I think what we were just talking about, a lot of it has to do with this term that is talked a lot about in the industry, like audience engagement, online engagement, right? Showing the value that you bring. So radio stations have been doing it for a long time through the membership model, trying to show, this is the value we bring, can you support us? It hasn't as much translated to the other industries. I mean, have there been, besides a paywall is one, tool to try to gain this. Have there been other, newspapers or media companies that have tried the membership model that have not been radio stations?
Yeah, it's interesting because everything that Bob's saying is something that media companies overall are very interested in right now. So as I was saying before, everyone wants to shift the focus now to readers, put the bulk of how you make your money on them. And the idea of membership is very seductive. It sort of changes the relationship that was there before. It wasn't just someone who has a product delivered to them and then you have no interactions with them after that. If you think about it, like, this is a very good product, but like, there's not much that the reader does with it after they read it. They're done. There's no feedback. So some companies have tried it. The Los Angeles Times did a membership program a couple of years ago. It was when they rolled out their paywall. It was happening with a lot of Tribune companies. The thing is, what they did with their model, it was really just sort of a different way of branding subscription. They offered things like getting access to like dining events or to their books festival, things like that. Now, all those are very valuable, but if you put that on top of what you're paying for a subscription, what does that really add up to? What we've seen, I think, maybe some more success with this, and then Lisa could talk about it a little bit more, is with nonprofit media, where they've changed the idea of what a membership is, what levels you contribute, and what you get out of that. The interesting thing, though, is I've been working on a story recently. This isn't local news, but I think there's something interesting to learn from it. The National Journal Group, owned by Atlantic Media, a very, very niche product. It's definitely entirely for people who are interested in politics, policy. If you're someone who wants to know about a transportation bill that's moving through the Senate, then you might read them. They changed their model from subscriptions to memberships a couple of years ago. And what they added on top of that was basically this sort of research and intelligence arm. And what they do is you pay a fee to them, and this is sort of similar to what Politico does with Politico Pro. You pay a fee to them. It's usually in 5 digits, 6 digits maybe sometimes. Well, not 6 digits, it's around 5 digits. But basically, you pay them a fee, and they will put together reports. They'll put together research. It'll be white label. You can do with it whatever you want. They'll even put together PowerPoint presentations. And so that changes the whole relationship of what a media company is. And then on top of that, they build events around what you need to know about what's changing in policy areas. One of the biggest areas that they've had success with would be something like this. They bring together a bunch of communications officials in one room, talk about trends in the media, how people are getting information delivered to them. So it's been very, very successful.
Yeah, I think that's also happened in the nonprofit sphere. Most of our most successful members follow a very predictable path. And that was really impressive to me because honestly, I've been to a lot of industry conferences, right? News industry conferences where we have a panel on business models, and about 45 minutes in, somebody says, we should be subsidized by the government. And that's the point at which the conversation just died and everybody heads for the bar, right? Because it's very depressing, and I think a lot of people, if they were willing to be frank, would say to me, well, maybe there isn't a business model for media, right? And we're just going to hustle as hard as we can to keep doing the thing we love and the thing we believe in for as long as we can. And I kind of had that attitude too when I went to work for INN, but then something happened, right? We collect a lot of information about our 140 members. Headcount, budgets, traffic, you name it, we know it about them. So I was in charge of that survey the first year. And apart from making me want to pull out my hair, I discovered a lot. And then we went into year 2. And one of the things I noticed is that our most successful members, and they were everywhere, and they did everything, right? They weren't covering the same thing or doing the same thing. They were in different places. A lot of them did not know each other, but all of the most successful ones had built the same lines of business in the same order. So there was a business model for media. I was looking at it. And the way it went was they started up. Now, some folks, I'd be interested to know how this could be adapted to people who have been in business for a long time, since most of my members are startups. They're less than, say, usually they're between 3 and 7 years old is the average age of a member. So they're new, born on the web, digital startups. And what they did is they got some startup capital, right? And they didn't spend it all on content. right? They spent some part of it building an events business, doing something just like this, right? And the important thing that did, well, it did two important things. It created an actual community. Sometimes when news people talk about community, what they mean is people come to talk to me, right? That's not a community. Community, when you have a community, you'll know because people come to you to talk to each other, right? They're facilitating conversations between people who care about the same stuff. So they started doing that. It also opened the door to them for sponsors. They could get event sponsors, right? And they would say, hey, thank you for being an event sponsor. We're going to throw in 6 months of underwriting or advertising or whatever word they want to call it on our website for free, and then maybe they could renew them at the end of that 6 months, right? After that, once they got so they went from events to sponsorship and underwriting, and eventually to membership, but they had to earn that, right? Both through these in-person events and through having a really good engagement strategy. They had to know they had to really sort of understand who their audience was and engage with them. And the one thing that they never ever did was they never allowed their sort of online presence to become either a ghost town or a mud pit. You know, yesterday I was online and somebody sent me a link to a page on a Rhode Island newspaper station's website. And the story was actually about people dropping racist flyers in a small town in Rhode Island. And can you imagine what the comment section was like? Right, the comment section was pretty awful, right? And you know, if you have a site where really people are better advised for their own mental health not to read the comments, you need to get rid of your comment section. And if you get rid of your comment section, I'd like to know what your real community strategy is. And if you don't have a community strategy, you're not going to survive, right? So news industries are interesting because they create public places, right? So is this a good public place or a bad public place? Is it a place you feel safe walking through? Is it like a good public park? Does it delight you? Do you meet interesting people there? Or do you mostly feel like you need to keep an eye on your wallet, right? So, you know what? I think I went really far from the question. I'm not even sure I remember the question. Could you tell Bob the question? Because maybe he doesn't remember the question either.
Something about getting mugged in the park, I think.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about, I mean, Bob mentioned the model that radios have had for a long time, so much about membership, and I was wondering if there are, you know, examples of that outside the radio. I mean, because I think it's something that you were talking about it, because it's all about creating community and providing that value, and then asking for support, as opposed to, you know, the old newspaper model.
The fact that I stayed on topic was completely accidental.
I mean, I think sure, membership is one aspect. You know, advertising, of course, remains a really important one. Data, at least mentions the importance of data. I mean, these are all pieces. I think really the one thing to think about, though, is like, what are we producing? I mean, media is the channel, right? But is there a market for news? Yes. Is there a market for culture? Yes. Is there a market for community? Yes. I think we would agree that those things are all, I mean, that's really what we are I think, I don't assume too much, but that's what we're the purveyors of, right? Anyone know Clay Shirky or read Clay Shirky? I mean, you know, it was talked about how the old newspaper model is sort of a happy accident of, you know, journalists wanting to mass reach in a given market or location, and advertisers wanting to do the same thing. It's like Justin and I are going to partner up, and we're going to do this thing, and, you know, I'm going to do the advertising, he's going to do the content, and boom, next thing you know, you have the Boston Globe. What a great thing. But an accident of, like, sort of common interest, right? I think, I don't have the answers, but, like, do we know what those new kind of models are? Is membership, or is deep connection around community or a common interest, or that sort of like, the Politico is a great example of that sort of super tier of, like, really people that are interested in the emerging. I'm way out of my element here, but the emerging, like, farm to table kind of economy of Maine, right? Which is a real thing. And you know, and what Maine today could potentially bring to that, or partner to bring people to that. Those are the new models that don't exist yet. But, you know, if the focus is on this is the value we provide, and then thinking through how those models might emerge is probably the first thing I think in media companies that we need to be doing.
And of course, as media companies try to figure out what this next model is, At the same time, technology continues to change very rapidly, so it's hard to keep up. I mean, 5 years ago or so, earlier than that, when we suddenly had the internet and we were creating home pages, we thought that was going to be, the entry point for our readers onto online. And that's becoming less and less the case. I mean, people are coming into our sites sideways from social media. Now there's, the platforms where people are, using to find their local news. So they're looking on Facebook, or they're on, an aggregator app. Apple News just is discussing their upcoming launch and Facebook introduced this instant articles. I don't know if you're aware, but it basically is going to be providing readers, an experience of reading a news article, never having to leave the Facebook app. So that means no page view for us, which means we can't sell ads against it. So, and this is all just changing so rapidly. So how do media companies keep up with this? I mean, obviously there's the big guys like the New York Times that probably have a lot of resources that try to do it. But how do local, how does the Press Herald, how does MPBN, and how do the local places keep up with this technology?
That's a great question. I think you yield. That's it. You just, that's it. You roll over and you let them pat your stomach and you call it a day. This Friday is just really grim, you guys. I'm sorry. It's all going to work out.
Yeah, no, we're getting to the happy questions.
We've got a really good big finish. It's going to be fantastic. Just don't look under your chairs. So it feels weird, from going and being a newspaper reporter to writing about these things in a business manner now, the terms that we use feel so alien and cold in a way. But we talk about this year at the lab, and you've probably heard this term maybe a little bit now, but we talk about distributed content, which is a really horrible sounding term for all the stuff that you create that finds its way around different channels online. What's changing now, though, is that a lot of these companies are wanting to host it themselves. Mm-hmm. So Facebook or Snapchat or Apple wants to basically give a home to the work that you create, and in some cases will either have an ad share where if you sell all the ads yourselves and you get all the money, or if they sell the ads, then they take a 30% cut, and you have to grin and be happy with that. So the problem is that a lot of this is being driven by consumer behaviors and habits. We know that for I don't want to say the majority, but for a large number of media companies, 50% of their traffic is coming from mobile now. That's only going to continue to increase. We know that Facebook is a dominant player because they have billions and billions of people who visit the site worldwide. The interesting thing, though, is the Pew Research Center has done a couple of studies on this. People do get news from Facebook. We've seen this regularly now for the last 2 years. People continuously say that they get news from Facebook. If you ask them two important questions, though, number one, did they go to Facebook for news? No. News basically finds them. They get hit in the face by news. Number two, what do they consider as news? It's not the things that we might consider as news. What they consider as news would be sports, weather, that funny thing that happened with that video, And then maybe third down the list would be something like local politics. And if in the case of something like Paul LePage maybe blackmailing someone out of a job, then that rises a little bit. I can say that, I don't work at the Press Herald. So then the question for media companies becomes, do we partner with these people, or do we try to find ways to work around these channels? I think the thing that's important to remember is that even with someone like Apple and Facebook, they do not reach the entire audience. And here in Maine specifically, when you look at what the penetration of broadband internet and connectivity is in different parts of the state, how does that change what you deliver to people? So yes, I think overall these are trends that we're seeing that are definitely changing the conversation. And people are considering, do they want to make some sort of deal with Snapchat because that's where all the people are right now. But I don't know for the long term if that's going to be sustainable.
I kind of loathe Facebook. Who else feels like Facebook is their frenemy? Despite that fact, I'll admit that right before I came in here, I checked Facebook and news hit me in the face. Same-sex marriage is the law of the land today, which makes today a really wonderful day, right? I know, right? Wasn't that great? I think it's super great. One of the things that makes this important is Justin talked about how huge social networks, how enormous. I mean, and not just social networks, but Google. It's Google's world. We're just living in it, right? And in Google's world, every page is the front page. So if I would say, one of my pieces of advice to people are not just about focus on this, but about not focus on this. Stop being so obsessed with your homepage. That's not how people are getting to your site anyway, right? Start being obsessed about your article pages. Your article page look good? Does it look good on this, right? And then the other thing to stop being obsessed about is stop the little local slugfests and exclusion fests. You guys can slug it out forever, all the while Facebook and Google and Apple News are rolling right over the top of you. You guys could turn the pump together for a long, long time before you were duking out over the last reader. And you're better off together than you are competing each other while Facebook goes and eats your lunch.
So I actually think there might be some good news here somewhere. So I'm gonna dig for it now. So the notion of what, as Justin points out, we call it distributed news or distributed content. It is the terror of big media right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is. I was at a meeting recently in New York of the 50 biggest media companies. We were fortunate enough to be there, and the entire conversation was about this. It was about Facebook becoming the brand where people go to get the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or NPR or whatever it might be. Apple News, they're going to launching Flipboard. They're launching a Flipboard-like product, which is basically where you can build your own magazine. It's pretty awesome, mm-hmm. right? I mean, the experience is pretty great. So these are things that if you're ad-supported, major media organization, you're thinking, OMG, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to split revenue. I'm going to have to cut a deal with Facebook. And what happens is Facebook becomes the news brand. But I think so where's the good news? You say, okay, Bob, where's the good news, right? It's coming, trust me. So I think the differentiator is local. I mean, and local if there's enough sort of meaningful kind of center, again, I keep coming back to community and the center of gravity and what is meaningful, if local news media stays relentlessly local and focused on their communities, that there is, likely enough resonance there that in addition to Facebook, you're going to connect directly to that brand. Will it be as many people as the entire market for all news? Probably not. But will it be much deeper relationships with people who are very close to what that particular news brand brings to the table? I think that's probably where it is. I mean, that's kind of been the public radio thing, where you have members, and those members are closely aligned with Maine Public Broadcasting or WGBH or WBUR or what have you, for any number of reasons. And so it's deepening that relationship with your kind of core constituents, whatever they may be. I think that's the answer. Local is, I've always been a fan of it and an advocate for it, and it continues to survive, as difficult as it is. Mm-hmm. The Facebook problem, the Apple News problem isn't the same. Now, if I get invited back, next year and Apple News is here, you guys can call me out on having sort of totally miscalled this one. But I think as long as the focus on your core community remains relentless, there's a lot of gold in those hills. So that's some good news.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add on that really quickly, I would say that focus means doing things like, well, okay, if we are going to go out and cover something in Wyndham, what does that provide? If we are going to go out and cover something in South Portland, how does that make us different than, say, the national brands? Because we like to think of these things in sort of the abstract overall. But for people on a local level, if you are commuting, you're going to want to know what the weather is. You are going to want to know if there's traffic problems. Those are the types of things that local media companies could help solve. I think that's why the interesting thing you've seen in a couple of news apps that have come out this year is that on top of aggregating the news, they want to give you sort of bite-sized updates about things that may have happened while you were asleep. They also offer you a weather report. Mm-hmm. So people are trying to think of how you can keep people around a little bit longer, but also create utility that's specifically to where you are, or 9 times out of 10 where your phone is at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's kind of getting into that second theme I mentioned, which is innovation in the newsroom. How do we use technology to better, serve our readers? So that's obviously, doing that sort of thing. Lisa, what were you going to say?
Yeah, and I was listening, and this is about that point. I was listening to what Justin and Bob are saying, and I'm like, okay, so how do I do this in my organization? I mean, geez, we're running a newspaper, and at the end of the day, I'm tired. You know what I mean? Literally, where are the extra hours going to come from? And, the fact that, to me, like, I think the way to do it is, start some kind of innovation lab where you can do small experiments to figure out what's going to work for you and your community. I mean, you're sitting at the end of, you guys could fill a whole week with a startup and create week. Start bringing those people inside, right? Invite them into your experiments. Help them, have a place to do small experiments, and have them invite those folks in who are already doing great creative things in Maine to help give you ideas. You're in this great idea-driven, scrappy, small startup environment. Invite some of that energy inside. That's what I would do.
So you're saying that the Press Herald should start a skunk works, right?
Yeah.
Would you like a new job?
Yes.
So I have an example of the kind of innovation you're talking about. So it's a little more good news maybe. So journalists in the room, newsroom folks, show of hands. Great. I'll be really interested to know what you think of this idea. So WBEZ, our affiliate in Chicago, had a woman working in the newsroom. I believe she was a reporter, and she started a little project called Curious City. So Curious City, the idea was, let's go out into the community and let's ask our listeners what they want us to cover. So let's vote on it, and they had whole mechanisms for how they're going to reach out. They reached out on air. They had online surveys. The tactics don't really matter, but the point was, we're going to go out and we're going to actually ask our constituents what they think is important. Now, when this young woman brought this back into the newsroom, it was like, what? You're gonna the community's gonna sort of drive the kind of the news-making decisions. It wasn't that entirely, but it was tremendously successful in terms of driving audience around specific kinds of stories. And part of it wasn't necessarily the stories they covered, but the outreach to the community, that we are listening to you and listening to what you want to do. Curious City has now become a startup company called Hearken, which was just came out of this media accelerator called Matter, which is a news media kind of startup accelerator, and has gone national, as I think in 10 public radio markets and going into others as well. But the idea is that outreach to community that started as a very small innovation project, and the data shows that those stories are you want to call them hits. They are hits. They are getting sort of serious attention and serious traffic. Does this change everything? No, but does it represent that kind of outreach to community and actually talking to your readers, your listeners, your viewers, to help sort of focus on what they care about? Is one example.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I think the biggest thing that we all could probably sympathize with is that there needs to be not just physical space for this, but also time in the day. Obviously news staffs are shrinking all around the country, and it's difficult to be able to peel someone off to do something that isn't part of their main job. If your job is to be at the Cumberland County Courthouse, then if you say to your boss, well, I'd like to spend a couple of days seeing how we can do something with court documents other than putting PDFs online, that might be a difficult conversation. But I think that, at least at the lab, we've seen places that have had success with this is where they allow people flexibility and wiggle room to do that. One quick example, I wrote a story a few months ago. This woman who works for the Arizona Republic, just on her own, came up with this idea, pitched it to a couple of editors. She essentially wanted to do a live storytelling night. How many people here are familiar with The Moth? Great, so everybody. So basically this woman created The Moth for Arizona, and it's all done under the Arizona Republic banner. But this was it was created by one woman who had an idea. She pitched them doing three events to see if it would work, just a trial run. The cost was very minimal. At the time, she was a nightlife reporter, so she knew the different venues to be able to contact, what days of the week would be best for doing this. And it's been over 3 years now. It's become a cornerstone of their events business. And it brings in money in two different ways. One, through people paying at the turnstile, but also sponsorships, So The other interesting benefit of this is that in this case, they've also been able to create a bunch of different connections and relationships in the community because they also work with the local public radio station, which plays excerpts from the night. They've also partnered with the community college, which has a storytelling program and helps prep people. But it all started with one person who basically said, I'm going to do this, it's low risk, it's low exposure, let me do this. It built over time. They added additional resources. They've hired additional events people, and it's been a success. And it all basically started because of just one person. So it's that kind of flexibility that news organizations need.
We mentioned the Facebook and the Apple News things. So those are platforms that potentially we could distribute the content. But what about new tools that we could use in the newsroom to better gather, report, disseminate our news? Whether it's Periscope or other types of tools, like should we be chasing podcasts now because those are so hot? Should we be and so how do local news orgs create a strategy to go after those without chasing every new bright shiny object? Yeah.
And I think live video services like Periscope and Meerkat are really interesting. In fact, there's a really friendly looking fella in the front row who's been patiently holding his camera like this.
I think that might be Periscope.
That, I don't mean to point you out, but are you streaming this? That's awesome, thank you. So there's already somebody here who's sharing this with people who aren't here. So part of what you can offer is a virtual presence for people at live events, right? And that's something that, instead of investing tons and tons of money in expensive equipment or training, you can download an app and start doing it now, right? And that's another way to provide value for the people that are, that you would like to have a long-term relationship with.
So how does the people in charge of the newsroom create a strategy to prioritize that sort of thing? I mean, should they be telling reporters just to go after Periscope and now, tomorrow it's going to be, oh no, now you have to start a Snapchat account or,
Our Meerkat strategy is Meerkat everything. To which they say, what is Meerkat?
You know what I mean? There's so much new stuff going on. How do you?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the best thing to do would be to read the Neiman Journalism Lab. That's my plug. I'm sorry.
I do.
I think the biggest question though is, do you build it or do you lease it? With so many platforms that are around now that there's a lot of overlap with, the decision is, should a news organization invest time in creating a strategy around something, or should they build something themselves? Do you want to spend time developing something, a video studio, when instead you can just have people go out with their phones? What exactly is it that you want to do with video? A lot of media companies are trying to figure out, do we want to have hosted shows, or are we just going to spend time on live video? I think to me that it's a better question of what kind of internal resources you can create. The Dallas Morning News, I wrote a short story about this a while ago. They created this in-house tool, which is unfortunately named and going to get them sued, but it's called Rolodex. And Rolodex, patent pending, Rolodex is basically a way of ingesting all of the contacts and sources that people in the newsroom have. Now, obviously, the catch there and the buy-in is that you have to get reporters to let go of the sources that they have. And so instead of just being something that's part of the intranet, that you can grab onto when a breaking story happens or you don't have a source for a particular issue, it turns around and can be used as a tool to help you map out connections. So inside the newsroom, what that does is basically, it's kind of like any scene that you've seen in we were talking about this earlier, any movie that has a serial killer or any scene from Homeland, when someone is trying to use a line of string to sort of put connections between different points, different data. That's what Rolodex does. It basically says, well, if you have this person's number in the county sheriff's office, this person also is connected to someone who works at IDEX or something like that. I don't know. The third part of this, though, is that they could then turn around and actually use that for forward-facing products. So they asked the public, what types of open records would you be interested in? What places would you like to see more sunlight shine? And so they asked what counties, what offices they would like to see people release more records from, and then they were able to turn around and make an app that was basically, these are the places where you can go get public records. These are the contacts that we have. Can you add some contacts yourselves? And so in that case, I think that's an example of doing something in-house that has a lot of applications for the staff. But again, you could also just probably very easily go out and lease something like that from a software developer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is really an interesting part of the conversation. In my division, we build tools for our stations. I mean, that's one of the big things that we do is do this sort of work at scale. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, don't build it unless it can be very, very lightweight. The kind of innovation that I think Rolodex might be, the kind of innovation that Curious City. I mean, they just went out on street corners and asked people. That they didn't sort of build an application and a whole digital platform overnight. They got, eventually got some financing to do that or some contributions to do that sort of thing. But when they started it was extremely lightweight innovation. I think that trying to answer your question here, I mean, in the interest of innovation, and like we've got a great idea at the Press Herald for I don't know, some platform to encourage local community participation. I'm totally making this up.
Mm-hmm.
Test, measure, learn. Test in as light a way as you possibly can. It doesn't even have to be technology or an application. That stuff is expensive. Your resources are scarce. And your job, our job, is news, is journalism. It's the content. In the age of technology at scale is expensive. It's hard to build. It's hard to support. There are any number of dead ends out there. I mean, it's really, I caution news organizations to get into the business of building technology. I would say borrow first, lease second, and buy and make third. Again, but in the interest of innovation, you can figure out whether the new idea, whether it's Rolodex or some other thing, is actually has merit to sort of go the next step. And there are methodologies to do this. There's a thing called Lean Startup, some of you may have heard about, which is a way of just, instead of like saying, we're going to go boil the ocean in 6 months, we're going to work in 2-week cycles, and we're going to just template this thing. We're just going to storyboard it and show it to people and see what they think. And then listen and see if the audience, if there's a response to that before you go to the next step. So I think, again, in terms of building technologies, I would proceed very cautiously, and there are any number of startups, media startups out there that you can leverage, that you can do business development deals with, to partner with in local markets to be able to see if some of this stuff works. Mm-hmm. Believe me, the entrepreneurs are there, and they are hungry for people with footprints of audience like public radio or local newspapers to partner with to be able to see if these ideas have merit. So
collaboration.
Borrow, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to?
Yeah, I always think like the most important question to ask about any of this is why bother? Like, why bother messing around with this technology stuff, right? I'm busy, we don't have tons of money, and I can't tell you why you would bother with it, but I can tell you why I do. Like I teach, I also teach a popular data visualization course for absolute beginners. And the reason I do is because it's actually possible for absolute beginners to use those tools now without having to get a 4-year degree to do what they do better. But the reason that I do it is because I'm concerned. I feel like journalism is becoming less effective at holding the powerful to account, right? The powerful have plenty of technology. We have to use it. We have to learn how to use it effectively to make sure that we still have, a functioning community and a functioning democracy. That's the kind of accountability that I'm looking for. That's sort of the mission piece of this, the why bother piece.
I want to get to audience questions. We're sadly running out of time. I wanted to remind everyone, they have the note cards. If you have jot down ideas of how you envision future of how you consume news in, say, 5-10 years, that would be awesome. I want to do a little quick rapid fire with you guys too, before we open up the questions, about what you think the future, like in Justin, in 5-10 years, what do you envision? Are we going to be all wearing Apple Watches? Are we going to be, Google Glass suddenly going to make a comeback and be hip again? Or, what do you see?
I will be very quick and very simple. It will
Yeah,
look
rapid fire.
exactly the same as right now, except for there will be small iterations on every single thing that we have.
So desktop, mobile.
Yeah, I mean,
stuff,
it's going to continue. It's going to continue. The trends are going to continue moving towards devices. That's not going to change. But right now, Apple Watch, people really aren't picking it up at the rates that people thought. Wearables definitely will be the future.
Right.
But, for me, the thing that I always come back to is what audience can actually afford them? Until those things are mainstream enough, as we've just said, avoid them. And so I think in the next 5 years, I don't see that changing. Google Glass, rest in peace, and maybe stay that way.
To make this more exciting, I should have said in 100 years or something like that, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
So I know one thing that's going to happen in the next 5 years, and it affects radio probably more than any other medium, is the car. So all cars will be internet enabled in 5 years, and that's significant. That's a big deal if you're in the broadcast radio business. So that's one thing that's going to happen.
But everyone could be. I mean, newspapers can have a live stream show on the internet now. So I mean, if that, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your point.
Well, you were saying for existing broadcast companies. But
Yeah.
if all cars are internet enabled, that means that
anyone can get in the game. That's right.
Right,
It's a fair game for anyone to get into. That's exactly right. No, but it's significant because 50% of I think FM radio listening in the United States is in cars. So in terms of the wave that hit newspapers in 1999, here comes the wave for radio. I think that Justin's right. I think devices will do more and more different things. So you're going to have more video, more audio, more different kind of cross-platform ways of consuming. So in terms of mashing up news into kind of mixed formats that are more interesting, or there's probably going to be more ways that with wearables and with haptics and things that a certain news kind of brief will kind of ping you when you want to hear something about a specific topic. There'll probably be more interaction between the device and you that you can control. And I guess the other thing that will happen is more and more user-driven sort of selection of news, which I think, by the way, can be dangerous because you can start living into a news bubble of like just a resonance of the people just like you.
So Facebook.
So yeah, right. Exactly. But more and more of that will become more common.
Yeah, this conversation puts me in mind of something that E.L. Doctorow said about novel writing. Someone asked him, did he know what was going to happen in the novel? Did he essentially know the future of his characters, or did he have an outline? He said no. And he says, well, and somebody said to him, well, how do you write the book then? And he says, well, it's like driving in fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can get the whole way there that way. So you have to have. Yeah, right? You have to have a set of rules because, I think we know a little bit about what might happen in the future, but not a lot. So how do you deal with that, right? The way I deal with it and the way, I talk to our members and we deal with it is like we have a series of tests. It's sort of like of all the ideas that you could pick, what idea do we pick? Well, like what do we choose to spend time on? Because really one of the problems is a bewildering number of choices, right? And so I have a series of 4 tests that, I don't take any project, and I don't grade on curve unless it passes all 4 of them, I don't do it. And I think the one that's probably the most relevant to media is I call it the everything about something test, right? The web really rewards narrow comprehensiveness. I think one of the problems for media stations is that they're variety shows, and the web doesn't really reward variety shows. So if I've got a new idea that I'm adding, I have to ask myself, what am I cornering the market on no matter how small the corner is? Right, and if I can't answer that question, I shouldn't start yet. I should wait.
Well, thank you so much. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes. Oh my gosh, everyone. How would it start from here? Work back.
Can someone comment on the new fad of billionaires owning newspapers? I'd like to see.
Benefactors. That's the other business model.
It's not new. It's old. Right? I mean, Justin, wouldn't you say that? Like we're going back to a previous meeting.
I mean, this is, it's William Randolph Hearst all over again. But, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I think that, yes, people can be concerned about people with big pockets coming in, buying a newspaper. Absolutely, they can have agendas. But I think the reality is, as we've seen, is that, you need someone with deep pockets who's willing to sustain losses for a period, because newspapers, even though they still make a lot of money on the print advertising side, are still hemorrhaging in some ways. And so, with somebody like John Henry coming into the Boston Globe, or Glenn Taylor, again, it's sports owners. The guy who bought the paper in my hometown in Minneapolis, Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post, you need someone who's got deep pockets who's willing to say, okay, we'll do this for a period of time. But that doesn't mean that they're going to do it forever. Yeah, I've talked to people at the Washington Post. They know that Jeff Bezos has said you have a runway, you have a period of time where you can try out a bunch of different ideas. I want you to be as free thinking as possible, but he's not going to just give them a blank check forever, even though he could technically because he's that rich. But again, I don't know if it's that different than when we had family ownerships for a lot of different news organizations.
There's the big plays like John Henry, Bezos buys the Post, come in, buy a paper. There's what has been going on in public media for a long time, which is major philanthropy, driven by mission or passion for the importance of it. That isn't sort of running the whole. I mean, there isn't a philanthropist who owns a WBEZ, but as WBEZ got major philanthropists to give them significant amounts of money, absolutely, that is the case across public media, and it's a piece of the pie, I guess, is where it might serve. I don't know how that syncs up with the commercial media, but I think there's a piece there for philanthropy to play a very important role, whether it's all-encompassing like Henry or Bezos or a piece of the action. Because we know those philanthropists are just driven by the importance of the work we've done, and to sort of capture that is, I think, can be an important part of the sustainability mix.
How about right there?
My particular concern is the vulnerabilities for investigative journalism in the next 5 or 10 years, and that's something that the Press Herald just did a remarkable job covering, and I think what you were the reporter, really in-depth investigations on the tax credit scam at the state level. What do you see any particular? Oh, and they also did a public event action. It was also very successful. Over 200 people stayed in the audience after performance to discuss it and interview, get to talk to him.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of the vulnerabilities, any comments, any thoughts?
How do you subsidize that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big deal. The organization that I work with is mostly people who were investigative journalists who were escaping shrinking newsrooms, who decided to start their own thing. And, that kind of, that particular kind of journalism is both the hardest to support and the most important to support. And I don't necessarily have, an answer of here's the recipe for how to do it. It's just that used to be part of an assortment of news that used to make money, right? And yeah, a buffet, right? And so, I think we have to sort of figure out ways to make sure that that's still happening. That's something that the organization that I work for is essentially doing, is we're trying to provide wraparound services to those journalists who, they don't have a business degree, they're not a computer programmer. We try to help them with the business and technology part so that they can keep doing it. So yeah, we really share that goal.
Are they selling per piece? Is that how they're?
Most of them are not. Most of them have distribution arrangements with other media organizations, and that's how their work reaches the public. And many of them are grant supported right now. Okay, so they were a part of for-profit agencies, and now they're part of non-profit agencies. They're becoming a little bit more like the opera. Okay.
And I would say, just really quickly, the one piece that fits with that is collaboration. That's the thing that's going to make the difference. Even in markets where you still have competition between news outlets, I think you'll continue to see more of them teaming up to do investigations. And there used to be a lot of reluctance to do that before because obviously you want to hoard your scoops. You don't want to tip people off on them. But I think what sort of let that happen and it's sort of pushing it even further forward is people looking at cross-platforms. So if you are at a newspaper and you want to work with the public radio station, then you can say, well, it's not the same because we're going to produce something for print and digital and then we're going to do something for audio. When in reality, you're joining forces and that's the necessary ingredient. And I think that's the thing that will continue to push it forward. And we see it a lot now. And Lisa's right, a lot of it is being driven by these nonprofits because they see that the best way that they can distribute their investigations is through local newspapers. I wrote recently about this startup that's in California that's going to be based at the state capitol. It's a model we've seen in a lot of states. But they're primarily online only. So they know that in order for them to have maximum impact, they're going to need to be in the Sacramento Bee and the LA Times and things like that. And so I think collaboration is the thing that's going to continue investigations.
Have it there in the back.
I got a question for Bob Knopf. I was wondering, the success of WBEZ and This American Life, and Wait, Don't Tell Me, HYY's got Terry Gross. Do those stations, two-part question, do those stations get to benefit from selling those programs to MPPN? And if so, does national public radio offer the tools for an MPPN to create that kind of programming, to bring in those revenue as well?
So, part one, yes, those stations are essentially program producers. So they are content producers. They own the program, and then they license it. NPR basically acts as a distributor in that case because we have this national footprint, so we take care of the business side of it. But Terry Gross is and Fresh Air, that's a WHYY production. And This American Life is a WBEZ production. So those stations absolutely benefit, and that is a new, or not a new, but it's a very important source of revenue for those stations is that original content production that they then essentially syndicate nationally. So yes, does NPR provide the tools? We provide a distribution platform. I think that's kind of a new role for NPR NPR is kind of this weird organization because we're a member organization, but we also are a national and international news producer. So we kind of play those two roles, but in the digital space, we build platforms and have capabilities to allow local stations to get their content, whether it's a podcast or a program like Fresh Air, onto different kinds of platforms. So yes, tools, training as well. I mean, the benefit of that national newsroom and the experience of that newsroom, we try to sort of bring that back to the local markets and local stations, so we encourage sort of best practices in journalism as well. So those are two fronts where we're doing it. I think going forward, this isn't necessarily answer your question if it's about broadcast, but if it's about digital, that NPR can go have a conversation with Apple or Google, and we do, or Ford Motor Company, and begin to sort of, we become I think an important distribution platform for local stations. So I don't know if that answers both pieces, but that's, yeah.
I'm being told we wrap up, but Keith, quick question. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Some of the sense of what the darkness around this is what's happening here really a correction on what was maybe what perpetuated by the old newspaper model, that we overestimated the real value of news and what people will pay for it. So we're wrestling with what's the business model that's going to work. But isn't this really a referendum or a test of what the value of what we consider news is and how much people will pay for it, and we're seeing it and we don't like it?
Keith, this is the rapture. That's it. Thank you. Good night. No, you're absolutely right. Really quickly, yes. I mean, in some ways, it's the idea that news ever paid for itself is false, like Bob said before. Advertisers wanted adjacency. They wanted the eyeballs that were next to the story. And it's been a very terrifying thing for media companies that now get analytics on everything to see just what it is that people read versus what it is we think they should read. So absolutely, that's true. But the flip side of that is that there is absolute information that they do need, and that's the thing that has to be balanced out.
Sure.
I have at least some good news on this front. Like in this rapture scenario, like everything else gets raptured up and all that's left is cat slideshows, right? But I have some news about this. Like we did an experiment where we replaced the share toolbar on 20 news websites. So the little thing where it says share this on Facebook, share this on Twitter. Well, we put a little widget in there, right? And what the widget said was share this story on Twitter or Facebook or email, and this newsroom will get $1, right? So we could see like what are people actually willing to support, because we also, after they did that, they said, would you like to match that with $1 of your own? Right, so I could see what were people thinking and reading the minute before they gave you the first buck, right? And I'll admit, like, INN members are kind of on the serious news side of the serious news spectrum, but the number one was actually a 13,000-word piece about Maine's governor, at pinetreewatchdog.org. You guys have a colorful governor. I read it. It was great. And and I think one of the reasons it was so popular is because I think figures outside of New York and Washington and LA don't get the New Yorker treatment very often, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve it and they're not interesting enough for it. The other things in the top 3 included a huge long piece about wetlands loss in Louisiana, right? So people weren't voting for cat slideshows. They were voting for something very different. And the interesting thing is it gave us 2 sets of data. What did people share? And then what did people click on, right? What people clicked on was even more interesting. 3 out of the top 10 things that people clicked on were actually opportunities to affiliate with the newsroom. Come to our event, support our Kickstarter, subscribe to this. There is an audience out there for those things. We're just not paying attention to it.
Aha, see, we are going to close on a high note. All right, can we give it up for the panelists? And if you did indulge us and wrote down, your vision for the future on a card, you can give it to Stephanie right there on your way out. Thank you so much for coming.